Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, locking up teens in adult jails, bad idea, say juvenile advocates. What's Maryland's Chief of Public Safety and Corrections have to say? Also, the Washington Post's Eric Pianin on President Bush's toxic environmental public relations. The Tacoma Park Folk Festival, where it's been and where it's going this year. Plus, who's going to care for you? State Nurses Association Director Catherine Hall on Maryland's nurse shortage. We've got poetry by Lyubomir Nikolov and Rose Solari, and the comedic juggling of Nikolov Whimsy. Come on in. Kids are not just littler versions of grown-ups. They're in process, developmentally speaking. Parents and educators know this, and so does the criminal justice system. For adults, the focus is on the offense, but in the juvenile justice system, the focus is on the offender. The notion is most of these kids can be reached. The goal is to help them turn their lives around for their benefit and ours. Or that was the notion before TV made it seem that every dark-skinned teen was bent on unloading a pistol over a pair of sneakers. Lawmakers railed that teens who commit adult crime should be punished like adults. A good soundbite. But a 1999 report by Human Rights Watch about juveniles housed in Maryland jails for adults gives pause. The report found these jails often provide inadequate education, mental health services, food, or separation from adult criminals. The Baltimore City Detention Center was singled out as being the worst of all, dimly lit, squalid, infested with vermin, and subject to extreme temperatures. Are the allegations true? We'll hear from Stu Sims, Maryland's Secretary of Public Safety and Corrections, the agency that runs the Baltimore Detention Center, and Penny Kahn, a public defender in Montgomery County, and Jonathan Smith of the Public Justice Center. Welcome all of you to the Coffee House. Let's start with Secretary Sims. The allegations, were they true at the time? Have things changed at the Baltimore City Detention Center?
I think first of all you got to make some definitions. When you talk about jails, it's the Baltimore City Detention Center which is the focus of the report by Human Rights Watch. We also house youngsters who have been charged and adjudicated and I should say found responsible as adults in the Maryland Division of Corrections. The Baltimore City Pretrial and Detention Center was assumed responsibility of state management in 1991. And with that, we inherited some problems, the most significant of which was the building itself, which was built many, many years ago. So yeah, last Friday—
Part of it was built as early as 1809.
Correct. With respect to the temperatures, I was there 4 days ago, and it was quite hot and quite concerning. And indeed, even prior to that report, one of which we certainly cooperated with and discussed with the Public Justice Center and others before they came, was the fact that we inherited a real challenge in the mechanics of that building. It's going to take a broad, multi-focused effort, I think, to raise two issues. One, how long we keep youth in custody, which is an issue I'm hoping that a commission on youth will help focus on and help reduce. And two, I think that the capital needs of that particular facility, not only for youth, but for adults and the staff that work in it as well.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, you were involved in that 1999 Human Rights Watch report and providing background information, I gather, for it. Was the report on point at the time? Has anything really changed since then?
The report was on point at the time. There were very serious problems, and I think there probably continue to exist to be serious problems at the jail. We were very pleased and gratified that upon the release of the report, Secretary Sims, Commissioner of the jail, Flanagan, took some very earnest steps to deal with, particularly around access to educational services. They reduced the population of young people at the jail, working with the courts to reduce the numbers. But it's a facility that is simply not appropriate or equipped to hold young people. I think that the Secretary says he inherited a problem when he inherited the jail, and it is unusual for a state corrections department to operate a local detention facility. I think the Secretary also inherited a different problem as well, and that's having young people in that institution at all. Maryland has very, very harsh laws that cause about 1,200 people under the age of 18 to end up in adult institutions throughout the state, about 600 of them over the course of a year in Baltimore, and about 600 spread out throughout the state. And not only does the Secretary inherit the problem of running that institution, but the real problem that emerges when you try to mix young offenders, people under the age of 18, in adult facilities, not only because the purpose and design of those facilities are just inappropriate for children of that age.
In the Baltimore Center, as opposed to, for instance, in Washington County, Frederick County, where it's very common for the adults and juveniles to commingle, it's not quite so common in Baltimore, is it?
No, I've toured the jail several times, and you see the juveniles together with adult prisoners. They do have a separate place in which they sleep, and only 2 of the 24 counties in the state of Maryland, only 2 counties actually make any effort at all to separate juveniles from adults. It's Prince George's County and Baltimore City. And I think it's interesting to note that the United States is signatory to at least 3 international treaties which require the separation of juveniles from adults, and we don't really do that here in Maryland. We don't do that for the convicted youth that end up in the adult prison system. We don't do that in 22 of our 24 counties. Even in Baltimore City, where there is a separate unit, when you tour the jail, you see enormous mingling between the youth and the adult prisoners. They mingle together in educational services. When we toured the mental health unit, we saw both young people and adults who were seriously mentally ill, who were on watch, housed together in the same cell. You see when children are subject to discipline, they're housed on an adult punitive segregation unit in the next cell or between cells where there's adults on either side of them.
But there's supposed to be a sight and sound standard, that is, that they're supposed to be.
Well, the difficulty is that, at least in a facility of that age, it can't be absolute. And that's an issue not only for our state, but certainly for other states. I think the issue of length of stay is a critical issue for us. And as we move forward, I think...
What is the average length of stay? Yeah.
Well, the length of stay has gotten too long. It's well in excess of 7 to 8 months.
And it tends to be longer for the juveniles than the adults, doesn't it?
And it tends to be longer for the juveniles than adults, and that's a critical issue. And we're hoping that the Governor's Commission on Youth, which is focusing on the issue, will come out with some affirmative proposals to help reduce that time and make it a key component with respect to the whole speedy trial right that any adult or any individual has in terms of moving their case forward.
The report did deal with other parts of the juvenile detentions in adult facilities in Montgomery County as well, Penny, and you're intimately familiar with that, representing as a public defender juveniles in that system. What exactly describe for us your impressions of the Montgomery County Detention Center.
Not a place that I would want to stay overnight. In the scheme of things across the state, I think it's one of the better facilities. The nice thing that we have in Montgomery County Detention Center, we have a program, the acronym is MRT, Moral Recognition Therapy. It started out, I understand now, again, you have the commingling because it is being used with adults. It was supposed, the way I understood it, it was supposed to just include juveniles, and it was sort of a step program, and they also got education. But again, the educational system is, you know, you've got kids that are supposed to be in school from 9 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
But better than Prince George's, where there's been no education whatsoever going on in the facility, right?
Well, I think the challenge there is simply to for the local education system and the local detention center, I think, to come up with one of the key components, which is the education, which I'd like to think, at least, that the Public Justice Center and others have given us credit for. In fact, the mayor of the Baltimore City came to we had a high school graduation actually.
This is in Baltimore now.
This is in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I actually came to our high school graduation 3 weeks ago. Rather than have a squabble among counties, we, the state, and we in the department paid for summer school, which is going on.
And I understand that the education facility at the Baltimore Detention Center is outperforming most of the Baltimore City school system.
It is in some respects. And the other component is now you have youngsters who don't want to leave, which is an ironic problem, but simply because of the educational component. And lastly, I think, again, we've tried to take some certain steps, particularly talking to the Justice Department about stepping forward on special education for those who are 18 to 22. So there are a number of things I think affirmative we can do, but I think that a key component means, I think, a collaborative effort in trying to build a consensus around what the future mission is going to be of the building and what are you going to do to address issues with respect to that building.
Is the issue really one of housing juveniles in an adult facility? I mean, we've seen the situation with Cheltenham now. DC has the problem with Oak Hill. We had problems with the boot camps, that is, juvenile detention operations where there weren't adults, and they were operating at an appalling level often. Is the problem really the putting juveniles with adults, or is the problem how little attention society gives to it?
I can't speak for the others here, but I think a key component certainly begins with management. And so first level certainly is constitutional management. Your second level, and I participated in a group headed by Bob Schwartz in an ABA committee looking at the whole issue of juveniles in adult facilities and trying to raise that issue. They presented a white paper this past December 2000, which really raises the issue because it requires separate management. You began the program with a sort of a discussion about some of the peculiar issues related to youth, and certainly that is an issue that has to be focused on.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan.
If I could just, I think that it is profoundly a much broader question. It is a question really of what are we doing about crime? What are we doing with kids that transgress the law? And if the choice is between a adult facility where you've got the challenges of a kid mixed in with adults and the brutality and the exposure to all kinds of stuff you don't want kids exposed to in an adult facility, or sending them to a juvenile facility where they're going to be exposed also to lots of influences that are not really well designed to return them back to society to function any better than they did that resulted in getting them caught up. That's not the answer either. There's a more profound problem is with how we look at kids and how we look at criminal justice. And you started the program talking about the demonization of children, which has occurred, this whole super predator concept that became the rage in the 1990s, the idea that we needed to be tough on kids, that we needed to lock them up, that adult crime, adult time, that sort of thing. And it ignores some fundamental facts about what we're talking about when we're talking about children. Children really are different. There was about 6 weeks ago, there was a study that came out of the Academy of Sciences that took a look at children involved in the criminal justice system, took a look at their ability to form the kind of intent necessary to actually commit crime, took at their ability to really understand the proceedings against them, and really concluded that when children are involved in this kind of behavior, their brains are different. They're developing different from adults. They don't have the capacity to really form the kinds of judgment that adults form. And that presents both a challenge and an opportunity. An opportunity is very different from dealing with adults. We've decided in our society that when a kid transgresses the law, we're going to punish them. We're going to be punitive. And what we know from the science is that doesn't work.
How do the kids end up in the adult system? They're supposed to be, if you're under 18 or whatever, you're a juvenile, you're supposed to be processed through the juvenile system. How do they end up in the adult system?
The legislature. Maryland has said when you're a certain age, such as 16 or 17, and you commit certain enumerated crimes, first-degree assault, armed robbery, or even just having a handgun, you're automatically in the adult system. It's non-discretionary. That's where it starts. Then there is a provision in which a kid can be waived
back into the
juvenile system.
In Maryland,
yeah. But it depends on, again, what the crime is, what your age is, what you start with. I mean, murder? No.
Well, what's ironic about the Maryland system is that part of the punishment of having committed an act is that you'll be treated as an adult, an act that's defined as an adult act. Ironically, in the Maryland system, you get treated as an adult not because you committed the act, but because you've been accused of having committed the act.
A critical point here that we're talking about pretrial detention here. These aren't people who have been convicted of anything.
That's right. Although there are very serious problems, and I think that we ought to, include very serious problems with kids who end up being convicted and end up going into an adult prison system.
We're almost out of time, so I have to ask very quickly for your short list of proposals to remedy the situation.
A rule, I guess, requiring a decision with respect to whether or not a youngster is going to be tried as adult or juvenile. That decision should be made within 6 weeks or less following that particular hearing, as well as, I think, a very focused study, I think, of housing issues related to this very discrete population. We only end up in DOC with about 100 people under 18. So the yield on that is not very much in terms of a base of 25,000. We've got to consider perhaps those issues. And lastly, I think a capital program with a mission statement for the Baltimore Detention Center, which badly needs it.
5 seconds.
And I just think there has to be better screening on these cases when they come in. The prosecutor's office in Montgomery County has set up a screening unit, and we get cases all the time. Charged as first-degree assault, they're not first-degree assault. Charged as armed robbery, they're not armed robbery. And so these kids are sitting in the adult facility while that process of review is going on.
Finally.
Okay, I think that I would eliminate the excluded offenses, keep all kids in the juvenile system. I think we also have to take seriously an issue that we haven't talked about today, which is the fact that these laws have dramatic disproportionate impact on African American kids, and that needs to be really seriously addressed.
And that's going to be our last word in this conversation. Thank you, Jonathan Smith of the Public Justice Center, Secretary Sims, and Penny Kahn of the Montgomery County Public Defender's Office. Still ahead, we have coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to have Tacoma Park Folk Festival, past and present, and Nicola Whimsy, jugglers and humorists, and Eric Pianin of the Washington Post on President Bush and the environment. But first,
how could she abandon the boy who only asked that she protect him from his father? How could the mother throw up her hands, cast out the child she'd made to help her in her loneliness? For already her husband wanders, ignores the plaintive tone of her voice, turns the sounds that not so long ago had won his heart against her as he heads for the door. She covers her swollen eyes with layers of makeup. And now she looks at the boy she might have loved and sees only herself, which she has become, pathetic, miserable, a devoted wife turned to tricks beneath any courtesan. For what is a child, after all, but a string that attaches mother to father? How could she believe she could make something perfect, all of her own? In the dark, she leads him outside, walks holding his hand to the edge of the cliff, fakes one step as if into the air, and then, when he follows, lets go of his hand. As she returns to her room, she covers her ears from his cries. And he uncoils his body from the crumple of his fall, touches his injured foot, and stares up at the place from which his mother's face still fades between the stars. There are losses we cannot allow ourselves to know. For now, he begins to work a fallen branch into the shape of a splint for his foot. Then he changes his mind and begins to make something called art.
Жълти каруци, мокри коне и лавандулата мъгла насред полето и още по-към слънцето пчелите, заровили муцуни в жасмина. Yellow carts, wet horses, and lavender mist in the middle of the field, And nearer still to the sun, the bees have sunk their muzzles in jasmine. Your face among roses is fragrant. A train passes, and we might not have been here. Your breasts might have arisen among other aromas. The brilliant cards might have been visions to another in the mist. At the end of the field, a train whistle blows, and the rails sink into the jasmine. The bees dance over the sleepers. Chance sometimes is everything.
Welcome to a second look at the coffee house. Symbols have always helped us understand the environmental messages from our government leaders. Think of Smokey the Bear, the Spotted Owl, the Hoover Dam. Now comes George Bush Jr., who is distributing small plastic cards stamped with an oil derrick. A big joke in Washington says that Mr. Bush's answer to every environmental complexity is drill for oil. But are we in fact misunderstanding the new president? Do we have him wrong? Here to set us straight is Eric Pianin from the Washington Post. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
So this little oil derrick, is that the be-all and end-all of Mr. Bush?
I don't think it's the be-all and end-all, but certainly the Bush administration's obsession with what they describe as an energy crisis and the need to develop more and more domestic oil supplies certainly has dominated the policy of this administration as they put together legislation to deal with energy issues and the environment. I think that it was interesting early during the campaign. Bush made some gestures and made some proposals that suggested that perhaps he was going to be taking a more balanced approach. He talked during the campaign about, for example, trying to reduce carbon emissions by industry and utilities, which was fairly dramatic proposal and perhaps bolder than anything that Al Gore was suggesting. Right. Since then, it seems as if his focus has been on production.
I mean, he reneged on the carbon emissions.
Well, that's right.
Within a week, right?
That's right. I mean, he, in a sense, he sort of fooled his own environmental.
Christine Whitman had egg on her face.
Exactly. I mean, she sort of took him literally and thought that he really was going to follow through on it. After Bush took office, his advisors took a look at the campaign promise and said, gee, I don't remember who proposed this. I don't think it's a very good idea. I think we better try something else.
Well, it's sort of almost an in-your-face kind of style, this that he's pushed out there. I mean, proposing to drill off the shores of Florida, where his own brother opposed him, and now, of course, he's been shot down by the House. What's behind that kind of sort of nervy approach?
Well, I think that part of it is just his background. I think both the president and the vice president come from business backgrounds heavily into the oil industry. I think they have a certain mindset that the key to long-term national security and energy security is to reduce our dependence on imported oil, and that means more production. That means more drilling. That means more coal production, and I think that the problem for the administration, and something that I think they've acknowledged since then, is that there wasn't enough balance to their approach. That they didn't initially give enough thought and emphasis to conservation, which ought to be an important part of any overall energy package.
Right, and I want to ask you about Kyoto and global warming, but speaking of conservation, I read that, and I know this is not a joke. I think it's not a joke, but last week he was talking about just shutting off the lights when you leave your office at the White House as a good conservation move. That strikes me as something Ronald Reagan would have said, and it seems like we should have gone past that kind of cute answer.
Well, I think I think that he's proposing a lot of things. I mean, the federal government ought to do more to try to conserve energy. There's a lot that they could do in terms of turning out the lights, being more efficient with their vehicles. I mean, if you think about all the cars and people associated with the federal government, that's a lot.
So it is a more serious.
It's more serious, but it's a small part of of a larger initiative or policy. And the fact is that they could do an awful lot just by requiring more fuel-efficient cars, SUVs, and these big cars that are real gas guzzlers. The problem is that the industry resists that, and consumers resist it. People have a certain lifestyle that they've become accustomed to, and to make a real dent in the problem, it requires people making some adjustments, making some sacrifices, and even this administration doesn't want or says it doesn't want the average American to make sacrifices.
Well, I suppose that is the answer to my question, which is that if you take the position that seemingly a lot of scientists do, which is that we have maybe 20 years to come to grips globally with the warming of the atmosphere, and that it will take a full generation to wean people off of consumption and so forth, that Mr. Bush is losing precious time by catering to those kind of interests. I mean, he's now stepped back from the Kyoto Agreement, right?
Well, during the campaign, he made it clear that he didn't like the Kyoto Protocol. He felt that it would result in tremendous blow to the U.S. economy if we were forced, in effect, to return to pre-1990 levels of output of carbon dioxide. And if you think about it, a lot's gone on in the last 10 years. I mean, we've just come through one of the largest, most prosperous periods in the United States history in terms of economic expansion. That means more factories, more utility plants, more cars, all generating more carbon dioxide. The idea of turning back the clock to pre-1990 levels is rather a frightening thing for the president and industry and the average American. And I think that I think the White House, I think the administration has raised some legitimate concerns about the Kyoto Protocol. The question is, do you basically scrap a process that's been ongoing for 10 years and start over, or do you try to find ways to improve the document?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and all of this comes down to politics, and it would seem to me that the way to sell the Kyoto Agreement politically is to say, we're not moving back to the 1980s, but in fact we're moving ahead to use new technologies and so forth, the new century, and you get off of the oil kick and onto something that's an alternative.
And that's part of what he's talking about. I mean, he is talking about the need for market-based incentives for companies to conserve and reduce their pollution and emissions. And he's also talking about research in this area. But the question becomes, will he accept mandatory targets for reducing those emissions over a long period? Right now, he says no.
He says no. Well, he's aware that he is dancing politically with this issue. We've seen here scrolled across the screen some of his key people, Christine Whitman, Gail Norton, Spencer Abraham, dressed up, at least a couple of them, and himself dressed up to look like they're at one with nature, very outdoorsy. So he knows people, there is a real core feeling in America, right, that you don't mess with the environment too much.
Very strong feeling, and a lot of the polls show that Americans care a lot about the quality of the water that they drink, the air that they breathe. They're very concerned about their kids and what kind of a future they have. Again and again, the polls show this is very important. And if you look at the makeup of the Congress, In the House of Representatives, there's a dominant faction of moderate Republicans, very concerned about the environment, and Democrats who will not tolerate policies that go too far in the other direction.
If you know, we're only a few months really into the administration, so looking ahead, when Mr. Bush runs for re-election, will we see the oil derrick and sort of that appeal to, as you say, big business and so forth, or is he going to come up with some new...
I think you'll see the bear in the tree.
The bear in the tree, right? That's what I'm wondering whether this is sort of that predictable political appeasance of his right flank at this point.
I think that most politicians, as an election draws near, tend to creep back toward the center, and President Clinton was certainly the master of doing that, running as a liberal during the primaries and then as a moderate during the general election, and governing as a centrist. I think what surprised a lot of people was that Bush proved to be much more conservative on environmental issues than anybody imagined, and he sort of opened himself up to criticism that he's doing the bidding of industry and the coal industry. You have to, in fairness, it's a mixed bag, and if you go through various issues that he has reviewed and made decisions on, in some cases they've fallen in the favor of the environmentalists, in some cases they've fallen on the side of industry. But it does seem that on some of the high profile issues like Kyoto, like drilling offshore of Florida, he's come down in a way that has generated lots and lots of criticism from him. He's taken a lot of shots in the polls, taken a lot of shots from Republicans on the Hill.
Okay, good. We'll have you back in a few years and we'll pick it up. Thank you. We have a new century with a new president, and given the mess we've made of the natural environment, we really can't afford any old solution. I think that's the message most of us want to hear from our leaders. Thanks to Eric Pianin of the Washington Post for helping us understand what President Bush really is trying to say. I'm Howard Cohen, and this has been A Second Look.
The thing I think that's different than the Tacoma Park Festival is that it is so community oriented.
Where else do you have such a diverse culture? I mean, Tacoma Park is really a microcosm of world culture. I think folk music is something we all participate in.
It won't matter much what they say about me if you take me where the air is cool.
Tomorrow's coming, oh yes, I know. Tomorrow's coming, tomorrow's coming, oh yes, I know.
What other parts of our bodies could we use to make rhythm? What do you think? How about your feet? It gets my feet tapping when I wake up in the morning. Little rhythm in the morning. See if you can keep clapping your hands while you tap your feet.
Get on board. All aboard. Get on board.
Folk music belongs to everybody means that we all come from somebody or somewhere or some culture. You know, literally with all these online services, you don't have to speak to a human thing. I like the fact that you need to speak to a human about this, and you have some interaction, and you're not just buying a product without ever talking to the person that's, in a sense, standing behind the product. What we tend to do in the United States is we make everything competitive. And folk music is a chance in many ways to not be as competitive. You can participate for the fun of it. So it's got a pretty good reputation. And you know, another aspect of the folk festival, obviously we're talking mostly music here, but the crafts that appear are very much times local people. The food that appears, very much local food vendors. The community tables, all sorts of things that are, again, reflections of the Tacoma Park community. And it's because these are the folk of Tacoma Park. It doesn't necessarily mean these are the folk musicians. These are the people who live in Tacoma Park, work on this festival, and celebrate having a great town.
I wanted to live someplace where there are lots of jam sessions, lots of folks to play music with, lots of places to go hear music, and that's met all of my hopes.
I just love playing here, and I do almost anything to be able to play here. So I remember coming here like 15, 20 years ago when I was growing up, and I always thought, man, I would love to play that. And now that I'm able to play this festival, it's just such a thrill for me that I want to do it as much as I can.
Most of us are dreamers, dreamed since we were young. We turn them inside out, just like the people we become. And we put off till tomorrow what we could do right now. Oh, spit it out. Say what you mean what you say, feel what you feel. No one has to throw their dreams away. Spit it out.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Tom Solari and Sister Patty.
It's really nice because it's small. The Tacoma Park Festival is a small community festival, whereas many of the festivals we play, there'll be 40,000 people, and it's just huge. So you end up looking for little groups that you can relate to, or people that you know. And here it's pretty easy. You kind of know everybody. It's a pretty easygoing atmosphere. Then there are all these booths set up around the festival site. So if you're looking for any information, you can probably find it.
You got to take on your life and see your own thoughts. Stop by the future or your soul will be lost. You got to take on your generator. You need more strength and power. You can't do nothing without the man. You need him every hour. Christian, rest on your startup and start your automobile. Put it in first gear and go on another hill. Drive on children, if I ever see no more. I see you when I pull in along the other shore.
To talk about the history of the Tacoma Park Folk Festival is really to talk about its founder, Sam Abbott, or to be more precise, Sam and Ruth Abbott, because the Folk Festival began in 1978 in the Abbott's living room when they lived on Birch Avenue. There were a group of Tacoma Park musicians that used to jam at the Abbott's house, and we used to play a lot of protest music in the mid and late 70s. Rudy Arredondo was there, David Sawyer, myself, Eleanor Ellis, Carol Hausner, and Sam and Ruth loved music, and they loved protest music. Sam, who a lot of people know him as mayor of Tacoma Park from 1980 to 1985, was a citizen activist and a political activist for many, many years before that.
Sam's been gone for a long time now, but I think I miss him most when I come over here every year and see what his imagination has wrought.
That was all last year. Here's what's coming up this year, September 9th, at the Tacoma Park Folk Festival.
Tennessee, California's Garden of Eden, paradise to live and see. But believe it or not, you won't find it so hot. You ain't got the do-re-mi. Praise be to God, the morning light of peace.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. Does it seem like it takes longer to see a nurse these days? America is suffering a nursing shortage, and Maryland is no exception. And there's no quick fix. Too few nurses means longer waiting time for patients, less attention, and ultimately worse odds in a life or death situation. Why the shortage? And what can be done about it? Here with answers is Catherine Hall, Executive Director of the Maryland Nurses Association. Welcome, Catherine, to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Why this shortage? Is it really as serious as the news reports make out?
Nursing has experienced many shortages over its history, but this particular shortage is different than shortages that we've had in the past, where we did have some quick fixes. We could have bonuses or incentives for nurses to come back into the nursing workforce. This shortage is different because we have more nurses who are older. In the state of Maryland, the average age of the practicing nurse is 46, which is older than the national average. And we're seeing a number of those nurses reaching retirement age and leaving the workforce, while at the same time we're seeing fewer young men and women coming into the profession of nurses, and certainly not enough to counteract the number that are leaving through retirement or through making some other career decisions at the end of their work life. So those things are contributing to the nursing shortage.
And it's global. Right?
And it's global. This is not just Maryland. It is something that has developed and is developing across the country in the United States, but in every other country around the world, for the most part, nurses are becoming a difficult commodity to find.
So why are some people leaving the profession before retirement, and why aren't they going into it? What are the stories behind this?
Well, I'd like to start with why we don't think that there are young people coming into the profession of nursing. Nursing is a very difficult job. It's a very demanding job, both physically, emotionally, mentally. And it is certainly not as exciting in the minds of a lot of young people as perhaps a career in aerospace engineering or computer technology and so forth. It also has the problem of having very little salary growth. Once someone enters the profession of nursing, entry salaries are fairly competitive, but after a few years of experience, there's very much just a compression of salaries, and it's very difficult to see a lot of growth in that piece of the
So
employment.
a starting salary might be high 30s, being competitive with other careers?
Yes, you would see starting salaries in the 30s, and an experienced nurse with 10 years of experience may not be making much more than 45.
So pay presumably is one
is
reason?
one factor.
Yeah.
I think the other factor is that for years, nursing and teaching were the professions that the majority of women were sort of guided into. And it was very difficult for women to, since nursing is predominantly a female profession, only about 5% of the nurses in the state of Maryland are male. They were not really pursuing other kinds of professions. And in today's world, young men and women, young women in particular, are going into medicine, they're going into law, they're going into engineering, and really have a world of opportunities. So nursing isn't quite the limited choice as it used to be.
And fewer men. I mean, 5% is very low. That's not moving up at all?
Well, actually, we did a study of nursing students about 12 months ago. And in that study, and we had 1,700 nursing students responding in the state of Maryland. Pretty much everyone who was in a nursing program responded to the survey. It showed that there were about 11% students that were male at that point. If those individuals finish, then that's a very good sign for nursing.
What else is going on in nursing? The danger of it, forced overtime occurs, I understand, in this field, whereas it doesn't occur for flight attendants. They have only a maximum of 8 hours, yet a nurse could work 16 hours plus and perhaps be dangerous to patients as well as herself if she's dealing with needles and contaminated blood. It's
well,
perhaps more dangerous than it used to be.
Mandatory overtime and certainly the safety of the healthcare worker are key issues in retaining nurses in the workforce, which is the other side of why are we seeing a shortage. Certainly the nurses that are in practice settings now, especially in hospitals and in long-term care facilities, are really feeling the stress of not having adequate numbers of staff there. And so in some of those settings, management is compensating for the shortage of nurses by having the nurses that they have on staff already working more hours and requiring that they stay there, which really puts the practicing nurse in a very difficult situation. That individual is dealing with an employer who's insisting that they stay for beyond their shift, and nurses may work 8 or 12-hour shifts depending on the facility. And nurses feel an obligation to be there for their patients. So it really causes quite a difficult kind of set of circumstances for the nurse to choose, what do I do in this situation? I feel badly, I can't leave the patients. At the same time, I've already worked 16 hours, worked my regular shift of 8, I've worked another shift, and there's still nobody there who's going to come in and relieve me. Those things sort of spill out into the kinds of things that you've seen in the papers lately about safety in hospitals and how safe are patients in hospitals, and do mistakes occur, and what role does nursing have to play in all of that. So that is an issue. Certainly,
on the safety issue again with the substitution of less qualified nursing staff for nurses. Lots of people see a female who's not a doctor come into the hospital room or long-term care facility and say that's a nurse, but increasingly it's not, is it? It's someone who doesn't have nearly the same amount of training.
You're absolutely right about that. And it's very hard to distinguish in any healthcare setting who people are. It's very hard to know if someone is a nurse, if someone's working for dietary, if someone is a housekeeper. And patients are often in a situation where they think everyone who comes into their room or comes in contact with them is a nurse. It was much simpler when nurses were in white uniforms with caps, and yet the practicality of that has long since passed. And so it really presents a situation where patients have to be actively engaged in their health care, and they have to ask and be observant of who it is that's coming into their room and who they're posing their questions to. And I would advise patients, individuals who are coming into any healthcare setting, to find out who is their nurse, who is the registered nurse who I can talk to about my care.
And that brings us to really the danger to our health if we go into hospital and we're getting less than ideal trained people looking after us because of the shortage. So it can, well, 50% of nurses work in hospitals and then in clinics and long-term care facilities. So it's not just if you get sick enough to be in hospital, but anywhere.
Well, you're
when
right.
treated.
In the state of Maryland, we still have about 50% of the nurses who are working in acute care hospitals, which is higher than the national average. Less than 50% nationally are still working in hospitals because there are so many other settings where nurses are needed today.
Right.
Long-term care facilities, which used to be known more as nursing homes where elderly patients may go for supportive services such as being fed or bathed, have now become an extension of hospitals where treatments are being done and more skilled nursing care is needed. So nurses have been pulled out into those settings, as well as home care that's being delivered in our state is being delivered in part by registered nurses who are coming there.
Right.
And so
what this has led to is a shortage in, for instance, ER rooms. If you are dashing to an ER room, you may find emergency care is close to you. You have to go somewhere else, drive to another hospital, or be even taken by helicopter somewhere else.
The nursing shortage has resulted in hospitals having to cut down on services. And so it would not necessarily be unusual for you to find yourself coming in for elective surgery and having that surgery postponed because there weren't enough nurses to staff the units that you would need to be on. We have also seen that our trauma centers are overburdened sometimes, and during peak flu seasons the emergency rooms are overloaded and there is not adequate staff to take care of patients. And so yes, they are being moved around and you may not be able to find those services as easily.
Just very quickly, so we're almost out of time, steps are being taken to try and encourage more people to go into nursing. Can
Absolutely.
you just list them very quickly?
Yes, absolutely. We in Maryland have been working with the State Commission on the Crisis in Nursing, which has brought lots of people together to look at this so that it really is something that we can address effectively here.
That's legislatively advertising campaigns.
That's right. We're doing advertising campaigns, trying to attract young people into nursing. We are taking some very hard looks at the environment, the healthcare environment, to make it a safer place and a more friendly place for nurses to work. And working hard, talking with patients, getting their perception of what they need, also balancing who needs skilled nursing care and where can we use some of those persons who may not be registered nurses in the best roles in healthcare, because there is a role for them.
Hopefully it'll all work. That's all we have time for. A big thank you to the Maryland Nurses Association's Catherine Hall for joining me in the coffee house to talk about the crisis in nursing. Up next, the Tacoma Park Festival last year and what's on tap this year. I'm Kathy Christensen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
This is the Nikolov Whimsy Show with me, Nikolov, and my partner, the lovely and charming Queen of Whimsy. We normally don't discuss politics, but we have a suggestion for our president, George Bush, the environmental president. He could be doing something to conserve energy while juggling at the same time, which is a merry occupation. And we will now demonstrate it for you. This effect is called, quite simply, huggling. Note the increase in temperature in your living room. Oh, by the way, you don't need to applaud. This next trick is its own reward. By the way, we saved over 90% on our home heating bills. And we get along really well, too. Wow, we've never gotten this far before. Hey, let's go into an elaborately choreographed dance routine. We learned this from NSYNC. And then they made passes at each other. Gleep! You look beautiful in this light. And that was so exciting, whoopee! That they decided to try a different position. Now this is cable, so this is all right. Woo! I have a good idea. Let's share. Love is like that, sometimes. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to call up 2 volunteers from our studio audience. Why, there's some right there. Give them a hand, they volunteered. Hey, Queen of Whimsy, there are 2 gigantic chopsticks from the country of China. Why don't you come on over here? Why don't you come on over here as well? What's your name?
Mitra.
Mitra, that was my name when I was a girl. Nice to greet you. And what's your name?
Liz.
Liz, my name's Nikolov. Let's shake. Very nice shaking, Liz. Liz, you stand next to Mitra. Mitra, you stand next to Liz. We'll put on the protective headgear as required by state law, and we'll do our finale, which is why we saved it up until the end. We're going to put on this one here for Mitra. Kind of rounds out the ensemble. Very nice. Very good. Very sophisticated. It has a certain je ne sais quoi, but I don't know what it is. All right. We'll get the spinning plates going. These are special plates available only at yard sales. Rita Whimsy, you have 1 or 2. Here, I'll get 1 spinning, and I'll give it to Mitra. I'll get the other one spinning. Queen of Whimsy will give it to Liz. Here we go. Perfect. Excellent. No problem. Hold your applause. Let it accumulate, as you have been doing so well up until now. Now, when we say gleep, stand on 1 foot and stick your tongue out. This will add to the danger. Here you go, Queen of Whimsy. Perfect. Excellent. As they say in France, pas de problème. Oop, là. Woo! It's almost 3-dimensional, isn't it? Keep smiling, it helps the act. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gleep. Ladies and gentlemen, Mitra and Liz, let's hear it for them. Well done. Let's all take a bow as part of the coffee house finale. Here we go. We'll all stand in a line and we'll do a little dance. Right foot to the right. Good. Right foot to the left. Excellent. Right foot behind you. And everybody take a bow. Thank you. Let's have a big hand for the coffee house volunteers, Mitra and Liz, not available in stores. I'd like to thank the Academy and all the little people. Right if you get work. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching Nikolov Whimsy, the first jugglers ever to appear on Coffee House, and perhaps the last. But it was really fun. And remember, if you shoot for the moon and miss, you're still among the stars. All right, bye now.
For this show, see you next time in the Coffee House.
Keely was my baby sister. She loved pink. We were playing with her dolls. I found a gun in the drawer. It went off. I made Kaylee go away. I hate me.
I hang out with a pretty trashy circle. The circle that helps this circle by recycling trash. We sort glass, plastic, separate cans, stack newspapers and magazines. Now, thanks to us, there are lots of products made from things we've already recycled. This cereal box wants your Sunday paper. These paper clips? In a more daring life, a 56 convertible. The circle works like this. It starts when we recycle trash at home and at work. It's completed when we buy products made from or packaged in recycled materials. How do you know the difference? Check the label for something called post-consumer recycled content. It looks like this. Make a mental note. Then buy the highest percentage of it you can find. You'll save a tree, you'll save energy, and in your own way, you'll help save the world. Complete the circle.
Call 1-800-2-RECYCLE for your free shopping guide. Environmental Defense, finding the ways that work.